Today we have the privilege of having two fully remarkable, truly remarkable speakers as our guest panelists. Senator Natalie Murdock, representing District 20, if I'm not mistaken, Durham County, and Miss Alyssa Ellis, Esquire, the Advocacy Director for Democracy NC. At this time, I will allow our two panelists to introduce themselves and give us just a brief description and background of themselves, starting with Senator Murdock.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. And so great to see Carol again. My soror was able to talk with her briefly yesterday. Spent 5 years in Asheville and actually loved my time there. I would not be a state senator if it was not for all the things I learned in the West. Yes, I represent Durham, but as a legislator, I care about everyone. If you are North Carolinian, I want to work for you. And not only did I live in Asheville, have the opportunity to travel to all of our 28 westernmost counties. So any sorors that are in the far, far west, want to give you a shout out. And also the disclaimer, I was already at the General Assembly and realized it is a Divine Nine Day. You are a Delta and you do not have on red today. So, but I do have Shirley Chisholm right behind me here. So she's always right behind me, but am a proud member of Durham Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, crossed at UNC Chapel Hill and Kappa Omicron. But can't stress enough how elated I am to be here for Divine Nine Day. I think our last in-person Divine Nine Day I was able to attend with the white tent on the lawn, and want to lead with looking forward to the discussion, but can't stress enough the power we all have. I worked towards on the presidential campaign and the coordinated campaign here in North Carolina towards the end of last session, and we were thrilled to launch a new initiative called Team Unity, and could not have made the inroads we did if we didn't have our local Alpha chapter that was knocking on doors with our public housing authority project to say, if you're registered, making sure we do everything to get you to vote. Had a phenomenal stroll to the polls in Pitt County. So can't stress enough the power we have. You cannot go to any county or town in the state of North Carolina and not see members of the Divine Nine. So can't stress enough the political power we have, and we need you. We need you. We need you. Full disclosure, we will not get everything done this session. It is a process. Coming into the Senate, there was an issue that I was blessed to be able to vote on that I was working on 2 years prior to becoming a senator, and it just so happened to move forward as I joined. So I want to add, it may take years, but we have so much power. I just cannot stress that enough. That is why we are here. When we get our ducks in a row and say, this is what we're going to push forward as a legislative agenda, you all have the power to reach out to your local senators, your local House members, wherever you live in the state, and say that this is what our agenda is as a body. We are not breaking any rules to advocate for policy. So thrilled to be here this afternoon and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Ellis.
Hi there. I'm so excited to be here and to have the pleasure to join you all as a panelist. And Senator Murdock, so grateful for your advocacy, especially around voting rights. As mentioned, I'm the Democracy Director, the Advocacy Director at Democracy North Carolina. We are a pro-voter, progressive voting rights organization. We are a nonprofit 501c3, so we do not endorse or oppose candidates. But we do advocate for progressive political change, particularly around major democracy issues like voting rights and redistricting this year. So really excited to share this space and share a little bit about the advocacy that we are taking on and ways that you can plug in. As Senator Murdock mentioned, to leverage the power that you all have across the state to make your voice heard. And as Senator Murdock mentioned, it's a long game. So it's not just this session, but it's the coming sessions and opportunities to plug in beyond just this year.
For sure. Well, we're going to get right into it. And as we saw and heard earlier, in 2020, North Carolina had the highest recorded of voter turnout in this state's history. Unfortunately, this did not come without controversy and unfair polling tactics. And in this climate of social injustice, of what we're seeing every single day, not just in North Carolina, but across the nation, what we're going to do today, we're going to take an in-depth look at both the past laws, that the laws that have been passed, and the laws that are proposed that will impact our communities throughout the state. We will also try to navigate the importance of down ballot voting and get that understanding of the power of the vote, one vote at a time. Finally, we'll share some information and some actions that can be taken by nonpartisan organizations such as ourselves, and that we can do to advocate for those that we pledge to serve, which is our communities. So without further ado, Senator Murdoch, do you have a presentation that you would like to
No,
present?
not, yeah, not a PowerPoint. I will begin, and actually, Alyssa, I'm sure you, honestly, folks have no idea how dependent we are on so many of the advocacy groups and organizations that we work with, but I'm sure she'll have the specific bill numbers. But I'll lead with, all of you are aware that North Carolina is ground zero for gerrymandering, and wanted to spend some time to touch on gerrymandering in addition to voter suppression, and to kind of wrap it up with how honestly things could be worse, which is why we need to know the power we have. So first and foremost, before I became a senator, we all were aware of the case that showed that a lot of our districts were gerrymandered with surgical precision. So down to the street, technology has made advances in full disclosure on both sides of the aisle. We have engaged in gerrymandering, but not to the extent of what we're seeing now. And I have a planning background. And so through technology, something called GIS, you can drill down to know exactly who lives on what street, how do people vote, do they use ID or not? So you can create laws that are truly, truly more oppressive than they ever have been before because of all the data that we have access to. And so even when it comes to issues such as voter ID, numbers show a lot of people of color and our seniors that vote at very high numbers may not have a voter ID. Neither of my grandmothers drove. They would have had to find another means to have an ID. So just to assume everyone has a driver's license or some sort of ID to vote, you cannot take that for granted. And back to gerrymandering, when we say that, I think it's a term that folks don't understand. But I think when you look at who we have in Congress, who we have in the state house, who we have in the state Senate, we are a 50-50 purple state, right? We're entering the second term, of having a governor that's Democrat, second term of attorney general that's Democrat. And the fact that we still, we don't have super majorities, but we still don't kind of have that 50-50 mix in Congress, in the state house or state Senate, shows that our districts are still very off. We were able to do better in 2018, better than a lot of folks thought. But the reason that that's significant is time and time again, folks say, what are you doing in Raleigh? Why are you passing all these crazy policies? Why are folks so extreme? The more gerrymandered the district, the easier it is for more extreme candidates to come in office. And it's a perpetuating cycle that I was thinking of on the drive in. I had to speak against a terrible bill last evening. And it's perpetuating because when you are elected to a district that's gerrymandered, it pushes you to the far right or far left, because that's how you're going to stay there, by being even more extreme. So when we say that we have districts where literally no matter how good the person is on the other side, it will be virtually impossible for them to win. That's what gerrymandering is. It's saying you're taking power away from voters to have fair elections, because the districts are structured in a way that it is very, very difficult for anyone except the party of folks that are most registered in that district. That makes it hard for anyone else to run. Packing people of color and Democratic voters, and is packing them in as much as you can to really dilute the power of their vote, to have district that looks like, salamanders and snakes and all sorts of crazy animals. And so do have to talk about that. The second point I wanted to bring up is we do have a bill now. I believe it's called the Election Integrity Act of 2021. It is not, they do a good job around here of bills will be filed and the titles will sound great. And you'll say, oh, that sounds like some wonderful legislation. But then you start reading it and say, wait a minute, I see a lot of issues. Typically those issues are buried deep in the bill, in the very final sections towards the end. And there are a number of concerns I have with that bill, but the one that I'll highlight is we have finally caught up when it comes to absentee voting, mail-in voting, voting early. So the oldest tactic is to attack early voting. But what's really concerning about this bill is the provision that says your mail-in ballot has to be received, not postmarked, but received by election day. If that policy were in place last year, over 16,000 ballots literally would have been thrown in the trash. It could have been some of the ballots of you that are here watching today. So that is very concerning to us. And in general, we need to get rid of barriers to vote, which is why I'm a part of legislation that will make voter day, election day, a holiday, campaigned on that. So I still push that. We need to have automatic voter registration for folks that, maybe in prison or on parole, making it easier for when folks reenter society, they have the ability to register to vote seamlessly and in a very easy fashion, making sure that your precinct polling locations make sense and you have access to those. And also making sure we preserve our Sunday voting, which is still preserved, but we need to have that, as we all know, souls to the polls, or just weekends, period. If you work throughout the week, you should have opportunities to vote on Saturday and Sunday. So that is definitely a bill that we need to continue to look out for. We all know how important it is to vote. That's why you all are here as a part of this panel. So the new tactic is let's make it so difficult that you can't vote. And I'll end with looking forward of actually being aware of we're in a better situation than we could have been. Coming off of 2020, all of us, myself included, no, Stacey Abrams and all the phenomenal work she did in Georgia, and we are working on that. We are rolling out a new project called the New North Carolina Project with a number of partners that will look a lot like the New Georgia Project. So first and foremost, we need to get more people of color registered to vote. We didn't do a good job of that last session. It was COVID. We were being safe. We were not as aggressive in saying, okay, if we know this district is, plus R by 2%, we need to know, okay, we need 1,700 new voters. We got to get them registered. We got to get them to the polls. We didn't do the best job doing that last cycle. But what I will say is what we've seen is you can do an amazing, phenomenal job with getting out the vote. And guess what? The next session, the legislator is going to come in and they're going to change the rules and make it even harder to vote. Here in North Carolina, luckily, we still have a governor that we can work with. We still have an attorney general that we can work with. In the Senate, there are 22 of us that will uphold the governor's veto, particularly around issues of voting. So we are in a better position than states to the south of us, such as Georgia, that have some of the most extreme voting laws you've ever seen. The same for Texas. So yes, those bills may be filed, but for the next 3 years, we do have the opportunity to veto them. So I do want to remind folks that it could have been a lot worse. And even though we don't have the same deadlines for bills around elections, I think that's why you haven't seen the truly oppressive voting laws, simply because they know it's going to be vetoed. So you could do one of two things. You could still file it knowing that that's what, again, those extreme voters want to see. Or you can say, you know what, we're going to mix some good and bad and just throw away absentee ballots in the trash. So that's kind of what we've seen in North Carolina with that bill is, instead of being overtly oppressive, it's let's change, your ability to mail in your ballot. So with that, I think at least for the next 3 years, we're going to fight really hard, knowing that, we can uphold a veto to make sure those extreme voting laws aren't passed. But gerrymandering and the new districts is going to be the concern. And that was why you saw so much money pour into our state, because we wanted to have changes in the last election so that we were in charge of drawing the new map. So essentially, we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. We'll continue to keep everyone posted, I'm sure, through the Divine Nine. There are ways that you all can get updates, but we'll need folks to speak out against those maps as soon as they become public. Numerically, we know some districts it's hard to do very much, like mine. I'm in Durham. We're just a blue county, no matter how you slice it and dice it. It is what it is. But you do have other areas of the state where we really are concerned. We'll need to look out in Wake County, Mecklenburg, a few other areas. Need to keep an eye on New Hanover. So there are a number of districts that we will have to keep our eye on. So we're really concerned about what sort of maps we will potentially be stuck with for 10 years. But as always, we will fight them in court. And unfortunately, in North Carolina, that's what's been occurring is whatever maps we are given, gerrymandered or not, likely gerrymandered, you fight them in court so that they don't hold up. So that's a very broad overview of not only kind of voting laws, rights where we are, but getting ready for our next battle, which will be the drawing of our districts and maps.
Senator Murdoch, could you give the numbers of the bills that you referred to?
Alyssa, do you have some of those numbers? I'm sure you probably do. Yeah.
Or if you can get them, can you put,
We can put them in the chat.
Definitely.
Thank you.
And that would be a great segue into, thank you, Senator Murdoch. And that would be a great segue into you, Alyssa, and to speak on the voting aspect of these bills. So take it away.
Definitely. I will drop a bunch of bill numbers and the names of the bills in at the end of my presentation. And my presentation, I will drop also that link in the chat so folks can follow along at home. And I will make sure that the coordinators of this lovely panel have access to it to send to those who may be joining by phone.
Great.
Can folks see my screen? Great. And I'll drop those numbers in there too. Hang on one second. I want to make sure I can pull this up. Hang on. Screen is blocking. So I can hit present. There we go. Okay. So as Senator Murdoch mentioned, there are a lot of bills introduced in this session. Just for some context, in our last long session in 2019, there were over 1,700 bills introduced. Of those bills, only 400, around 400 made it through crossover, but it means that our lovely advocates and champions at the legislature are very, very busy. And so we're going to give you an overview of some of the voting rights bills, the good, the bad, the ugly, for you to get educated on and act on this session. And some of the good bills are bills that Senator Murdoch and others will be fighting for in years to come. And some of the opposition bills we are working on really diligently right now to make sure they don't become law. And so we're going to jump into this. As we mentioned, I'm Alyssa Ellis, the Advocacy Director at Democracy North Carolina. And this presentation is going to give an overview of the national and state context, why we are where we're at after 2020. A little look at the legislative advocacy that we're doing at Democracy North Carolina, along with other amazing organizations like Black Voters Matter, the North Carolina Black Alliance, A. Philip Randolph Institution, a lot of amazing organizations that we partner with, and then give you some information on opportunities to get involved with our amazing organizing team like Kamaria Lawrence, who invited me to speak today. And then we'll have time for the question and answer and discussion portion with everyone. So the landscape, 2020 was a major election. We saw huge turnout despite the pandemic. And what we saw overall was a trend that favored Democrats in a lot of states and obviously in the presidential election. And so the backlash is fierce right now to undermine the amazing wins that we saw in Georgia and other states. And as you all know, the governor's race was decided again by a slim margin. And so we've seen over 400 anti-voter bills introduced in over 47 states. So these bills that we are seeing in North Carolina are similar to bills that we're seeing in Georgia and other states. It's a coordinated strategy to undermine the power, particularly of Black and Brown voters and of young voters. But we are seeing some good movement at the national level, which is some federal legislation that would impact voting rights in North Carolina and other states, like the For the People Act, also known as HR 1 and S1, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Both of these bills would do amazing things for voter registration, like Senator Murdoch mentioned, making it easier to vote. They would do a lot in terms of voting by mail and ensuring that people who need to cast their ballots by mail or feel more comfortable can vote by mail. And so those are, the bright spots that we have in the national landscape. But when it comes to North Carolina, Senator Murdoch said it perfectly. I mean, we just saw historic voter turnout. In North Carolina, we saw the highest voter turnout that we have ever seen in our state. And what we saw was a big shift in voter behavior. A lot of voters chose to vote by mail. And in North Carolina, we're a no excuse vote by mail state. So you can vote your ballot by mail if you so prefer. And we saw that a lot of voters, actually majority of the votes by mail, were unaffiliated voters. So even though Republicans are attacking this as a Democratic opportunity to suppress votes, we know that a lot of voters like to vote by mail. And we're not only seeing attacks to vote by mail, but we're seeing Republican opposition to all forms of voting access, including, same-day registration and the like. And also some really scary attacks on democratic structures, trying to undermine the governor's power in a state of emergency, which was very important during the pandemic. For those of you on the East Coast, you know what it's like during hurricane season. And hurricane season often coincides with when people are voting. And so we know that some of the counties have been hard hit and it's impacted elections. So we want to make sure that we, keep the governor's powers strong so he can respond to emergencies. And as Senator Murdoch mentioned, multiple anti-voter bills have been introduced. And so we're going to take a look at those, and I'll make sure to drop all the bill numbers in there because it can be a little bit like alphabet soup when you get into it. But I'm going to talk a little bit about our pro-voter policies. So in 2020, we had some really good pro-voter policies that were bipartisan. So it is astounding that there's Republican opposition to these common sense pro-voter regulations that were put in place, like going from 2 witness signatures to 1 witness signature. For folks who are homebound and voting by mail and maybe living alone, it's a challenge just to find 1 signature. So we shouldn't make it harder by having 2. We also firmly believe that all ballots should have prepaid postage. And that's included in some of the amazing bills that Senator Murdoch and other champions have been advocating for. We also believe that there should be a cure process and that it should be codified. It should become law. So if you make a mistake, a simple error on your vote by mail ballot, it should be easy to fix that mistake. It should be easier for voters to vote. We also believe we need more time for voters to get their ballots returned. We know that the Postal Service is having a hard time right now. They're underfunded, and we need to make it easier for those ballots to go through the mail stream and have the time. If they're voted by Election Day, they should be counted. And we want secure drop boxes. We want it to be easy for folks to go drop that ballot in. And for voter registration, Senator Murdoch said it perfectly. We have our work cut out for us to get folks registered, and it's hard in North Carolina. So we want to make it easier. We want automatic voter registration. We want to expand voter registration, and we want same-day voter registration on Election Day. If you need to register to vote on Election Day, you should be able to register to vote on Election Day, and your vote should count. We also saw the importance of poll workers in 2020. The good folks who are there helping you out, who are handing you the ballot, and we want to make it easier for them. We want them to be well paid, and we want to diversify the poll workers. We want poll workers that reflect the diversity of our community. We want Black and brown poll workers. We want young poll workers. And we also want to make sure that folks who go to the polls aren't facing voter intimidation. We know that was, one of the scary parts of last year wasn't just the pandemic, but it was the severe racist repression that we saw at certain voting sites. And so we partnered with a lot of organizations who are out monitoring, and I'm sure a lot of you out on this call were helping to monitor the elections to make sure that they were safe for everyone. And so going into the anti-voter bills, we have the Election Certainty Act. It requires all civilian absentee ballots to be received by 5 p.m. on Election Day. This is House Bill 782. And as Senator Murdoch said, in 2020, this meant over 11,000 absentee ballots would not have been counted. They would have gone straight into the trash. And so Democracy North Carolina and other organizations are putting out action alerts. And I will share some links once this presentation's over. And it's as simple as hopping on your computer, clicking, and letting the folks who are opposing this bill know that they are your champions, and the folks who are putting this bill forward that they need to cut it out. We do not appreciate the attacks. There are also a handful of other bills that are really challenging, like Senate Bill 326, the Election Integrity Act. It's very similar to the bill that I just mentioned, but it restricts the amount of time you have to request an absentee ballot. Instead of having 2 weeks, voters would only have a single week. It also does what the bill that I just mentioned, 782 does, which is it limits ballots. They have to be received by 5 p.m. on election day. This would throw out over 11,000 ballots in 2020. And that's the difference in many key races. It also prohibits state and county board of elections from receiving private funding. So we know that our county boards of elections never get the money that they need to administer the elections, to pay poll workers, and this would make it even harder. And then finally, they're trying to revive photo ID, and they were willing to set aside $5 million for photo ID to make it harder for folks to vote, but not $5 million to make it easier for folks to vote. This bill right now has not moved, but we're monitoring it closely to see if it will move. The second one is opposing federal authority regarding elections. This is House Resolution 330, and it's attacking the For the People Act, one of the key pieces of federal legislation I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, which would make it easier for folks to vote. And so this is basically our own representatives who oppose voting rights saying, we don't even want our federal congressional folks to give us the voting rights that we deserve. And then finally, no soliciting election funds. So this restricts funding sources for elections. It directly is attacking the ability for folks to vote and for counties to pay what they need to pay for voting, especially vote by mail, which is costly. It involves printing, it involves processing. So they are directly attacking all of our rights to vote. But our champions like Senator Murdoch are fighting for good bills. And this is a long game strategy to put North Carolina back on the map and in a position with the rest of the country to have really good voting rights bills. So this is actually one of the most just common sense bills that we are really, really pushing for, which is to repeal the literacy test. When we talk about Jim Crow 2.0 with some of these bills, it is alive and well in North Carolina. And for a little historical background, in 1889, the literacy test was added to our state constitution. So it is baked in the most elemental part of our law here. And there have been numerous efforts to remove this literacy test, which we know was designed to keep Black and brown voters and poor voters from being able to access the ballot. And so there is a bill right now that is fighting to have this put before voters in 2022 so that North Carolinians can vote to repeal the literacy test, change our constitution, and eliminate that horrible, horrible regressive voter suppression. And I think although it is symbolic, it is indicative of where we're at, that something like the literacy test has not even moved forward. Good maps, Fair Maps Act. Redistricting is so important. Senator Murdoch just walked us through why we cannot allow the opposition to dilute our power. And so one of the great bills that's been introduced that unfortunately probably won't go anywhere this session, but lays the groundwork for future legislation is the Fair Maps Act, which establishes an independent citizens redistricting commission. So it takes the power away from special interests, from political parties like the Republican Party. It puts it in the hands of everyday North Carolinians and allows them to draw our legislative and congressional districts. And it requires transparency and public comment. As Senator Murdoch said, we have our work cut out for us. There's actually a really amazing training this evening that the Black Alliance and NC Counts are putting on that educate folks on redistricting so folks can review the maps. And I'll drop a link in for that registration as well. And so the timeline for this would be, if this piece of legislation passes in 2021, voters in 2022 would have to approve it, and then it would become effective in 2023, so in advance of the next presidential election. So a lot of these bills are a long game strategy. And then we have two really amazing pro-voter bills, Safeguarding Voter Rights and Fix Our Democracy. And they have key provisions that are in the For the People Act: automatic voter registration, absentee voting improvements like one witness, independent redistricting, like we mentioned, transparency and access to the General Assembly. We should be able to know when the General Assembly is meeting, and they shouldn't be hiding that from us. We also want disclosure for financing of political ads, so we know what special interests are fighting for particular candidates, and list maintenance reforms. Voters should not be kicked off the rolls because they're inactive. We should be making it easier to vote. We want election day to be a paid holiday, and we want poll worker flexibility. These two bills right now are likely dead and not going anywhere, but our advocates are fighting hard, speaking out in favor of these common sense pro-voter bills. And so it's time to take action and harness the power that you all have. So one way to do it is at the federal level to fight for the For the People Act. It is currently undergoing revisions in the federal Congress. Also sign up. If not with Democracy North Carolina, get plugged in with Black Voters Matter, get plugged in with Southern Coalition for Social Justice, get plugged in with APRI, the North Carolina Black Alliance and Advance NC. Get linked up so that you can get email messages about these bills, because as Senator Murdoch said, they're changing, conditions are changing quickly, and contact your legislators. Tell your champions that you appreciate them speaking out, and tell the folks who are fighting against our right to vote that you don't appreciate it and that their time is limited in office. We got to get them out. And if you want to testify, if you want to bring your personal story to the legislature because you know how important vote by mail was for you, or you know what having photo ID would do for a loved one or yourself, contact us. I'll put this email in the chat as well, Caroline at Democracy North Carolina. We are willing to help folks testify so people have to confront the voters that they are trying to disenfranchise. And last, but certainly not least, contact our organizing team. We have organizers all across the state. And I will put a take action link. You're going to get a whole bunch of links in the chat so that you can plug into coalition meetings and partner organization meetings. And I want to extend a big thank you to Kamaria for inviting me to be here out of Charlotte. And so plug in with folks. Folks are willing to plug you into phone banks, get you ready to go. And so I want to leave space for Q&A, and I will cut the presentation off so I can see the chat, so I can upload bill numbers and share some quick and easy click and take action opportunities. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. Very, 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 very informative, dynamic and empowering conversations, and that we can bring back, like we said, like I ever thought it would be, and everything we wanted to be, so that we can bring back things back to our communities and teach our communities what's going on, what these bills are really about, what the name of them are, and like you and Senator Murdoch said, yeah, some of them are dressed up to be nice and pretty, but you look at them and it's like, oh, wait a minute. And to the unsuspected voter, this could be taken over like, okay, yeah, this bill is this, but we don't, to dig down into the weeds, we really are not sure. So this is what our time is, as far as this organization or these organizations and today, is to learn more about it so that we can go back to our communities and address these questions, these queries about what some of these voting laws are out there and about, and we hear about them nationally all the time, but we're like, huh, what is it? But what is it really called? What is it and everything? So I do really, really thank you here in North Carolina, because we see that it is a major, just like it has been in every election, it is a major it is a major playing obstacle in everything. You have to look at North Carolina, and it's important that our communities really, really, really take the time and know what we're voting for. Some of the questions about some of the bills, especially for, and I think this is probably going to be more for Senator Murdoch. And I know it's not a voting bill, but what are your thoughts of the bill that now changes, or is proposed, I guess I should be a better words, to change protesting from a misdemeanor to a felony? Can you have any thoughts and share your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I was multitasking here, putting my email in the chat for everyone. But Yes, and two things, because I do want to prepare folks because I'll be honest, I think one of the bills not only could move forward, but could be signed by Governor Cooper. And I do think that's the bill that's going to come out of the Senate, Senate Bill 300. It will be on the floor today. Definitely it's far from where we wanted it to be, but even according to the ACLU, the protest provision is better than it was initially, by far not as bad as what's coming out of the House. So in the Senate, it is called the Criminal Justice Reform Bill. Again, those great titles, doesn't it sound warm and fuzzy? Senate Bill 300. But I will admit, we've been negotiating on that bill for some time. Most recently, being that we are with the Divine Nine, I do want to highlight. I'm also Secretary of the Legislative Black Caucus, and thanks to the leadership of Senator Ben Clark, Senator Toby Fitch, and Senator Robertson, about 6 of us were able to meet with one of the primary sponsors of Senate Bill 300 and at least get the family access to body camera footage in the event that their loved one had serious bodily injury or dies. So we were able to get that change. It got some media attention. It was bipartisan. It was added to Senate Bill 300, but that is the same bill that does still have some concerning language, but better than what it could have been. But I think the bill that folks are the most concerned about, as they should be, is the riot bill coming out of the House. So not only is this crossover, I think what I'll highlight more than anyone for process so that you know what to focus on is this is the time where if a bill is in the House, it has to make it to the Senate. If a bill is in the Senate, it has to make it to the House. But we still can continue to move forward and do all that we can to try to make these bills better. So first and foremost, if they don't make it to our chambers, then we're done. The bill is dead. But the ones that do make it through, we will continue to beat that drum and say, we don't want you to infringe upon our first, our right to free speech to say just because we are peacefully protesting and someone behind us throws, a rock in a window and they say that property damage equates to $2,000. All of us should not be swept up, charged for rioting and getting a felony because it will be up to that arresting officer to make that decision on what do they perceive that action to be. So that's what's concerning is since it is left up to perception, in my opinion, opens up the door for Black and brown people to be arrested that are being peaceful. Not folks that are, damaging property, peaceful folks. From the initial versions of that is what we were concerned about. So we were able to walk that down a little bit in the Senate, but we'll continue to keep an eye on that House bill that did make it out of the House. So when it comes to the Senate, we will continue to do all we can. If we make changes in the Senate, which hopefully we will be able to do, then we'll enter a conference process where representatives from the House and Senate will get in a room, have to hash it out, and we'll go from there. And again, our last resort is always request the governor to veto the bill. You can do that as early as you like. They receive those emails all the time. In the event that there is a veto, then we will do everything that we can to uphold that in the House and the Senate. And so I think this is definitely one of those bills. Be proactive, say, Governor Cooper, we do not want this. And we will go to work and do everything we can to uphold that veto in the House and the Senate. But very concerning legislation. So thank you for that commentary.
Okay. We also have a question in the chat about the majority numbers of Republicans. Would you like to answer that question?
Yes. So back to why, yes, I will be clear. We do not have everything we want. Came into the session thinking we were going to take the Senate. That did not happen. But I'm 37 and patient, so we'll have to get that done another time. But when we talk about upholding a veto, that's really when the majority minority discussion becomes the most prevalent. What it does not do, since this is Legislative Day and Advocacy Day, folks do need to be clear. Perfect example. I'm pushing for the Crown Act so that you cannot be discriminated against for wearing natural hair. We just had an incident in Durham actually over the last few days that I believe will gain national attention. So I was working with folks this morning with the Crown Act, but the fact remains when you're in the minority, you do not control who is chair of a committee. You do not control who is the leader of the House, the speaker, any of that. So when you're in the minority, literally, less than 50-50, that means that you don't get access to taking the crown. And as an example, even making sure it can make it to a committee, even making sure it can get a hearing, even making sure it gets to the floor. I've had 4 or 5 bills that have made it out of the Senate. And even when that bill makes it to the House, a certain amount of members in the House have to even agree to your bill making it to the floor. It doesn't just automatically show up on the floor. So at any rate, there are a lot of levels to kind of how your bill makes it through. So in the Senate, there are 50 senators. So the sweet spot for us would be 26. What we were advocating for in the last session was, or what I was looking at the maps, because I'm a realist. If we had gotten to 25 and had my soror, Yvonne Holly, elected as lieutenant governor, we would have been okay. So that's similar to what you're seeing in the US Senate, where they're 50-50, and Senator, now Vice President Harris, has to come in and break that tie. So we would have been in that position in the Senate had we gotten to 25. So since the maps are difficult, that's still our goal, to at least get to 25, 26. Anything higher than that will be difficult with the maps that we have. In the House, if my memory serves me correctly, I believe we lost 6 seats but gained 2. So I believe we had a net loss of 4. I'll have to double check my math on that. But we don't have what you call a super majority of Republicans in the House or the Senate. So that means that if something happens and the governor vetoes it, they don't have the 2/3 majority outright to just override whatever the governor vetoes. When Governor Cooper was first elected, they did. So you would constantly see overrides like every day, left and right. So now he does have the power of a veto pen, but we still have to go farther to say we want to be in control. We want to be in the driver's seat. We want to set policy. We want to get things done. Make sure you can't gerrymander, suppress votes, fully fund public education, expand Medicaid, all those phenomenal things we would love to do. We aren't in control of that process if we don't have the seats we need in the House and the Senate. And it is that simple. And that's why we're here, because with the reach of Divine Nine across all 100 counties, that is the type of ground game we will need to make changes for 2022 and 2024.
Okay, great information. This next question, Alyssa, can you speak on the importance of down ballot voting, and what, to the unsuspected eye, what exactly is down ballot voting, and why is it so important, especially in the race that we.
Yes, certainly. So down ballot voting is, the process of voting for all of the candidates on the ballot in really important local races. And one thing that has been studied a lot is that voters sometimes will vote for key races like the presidential that comes first, or congressional, and either not be as educated on important local races, and or sometimes even forget to flip their ballot over and actually vote on those key races. And those races have profound impact from, environment, if you're, voting for soil and water, obviously policing, if you're voting for your sheriff, which will be on the ballot in 2022, all sheriffs will be on the ballot. And that's a very important role, and other major positions in local municipalities. And so this year, although it's not a major federal election year, so there are no representatives from our House or Senate or congressional federal races, there are really key races like school board races and local races to vote. And one thing that we do know is because of the census delay and redistricting, some municipalities may move their races to 2022, and that will make down ballot voting even more important. If you have city council and you have school board and you have all of the federal races and sheriffs and other key important stakeholder races, Really important to educate yourself on the different positions that candidates have, and to make sure that you are voting your ballot in its entirety, and flipping it over. In certain circumstances, you may be able to vote for more than one candidate, depending on vacancies and the amount of folks elected to a specific office. And so making sure that you are voting for all of those candidates, and that active participation in municipal election cycles like this year can make sure that you don't get removed from our voter rolls. Because one of the things that happens in North Carolina is we have something called biennial list maintenance, and I'll drop some information on that in the chat. But if you become an inactive voter because you have not voted in multiple cycles, and you have not completed a change of address form or otherwise been in touch with your county board, you can be removed from the voting rolls. And I will just say, this is no small thing. In 2019, it was over 500,000 North Carolina voters. We know that Black voters and voters of color are overrepresented in being removed from the rolls. And this year, no different, over 300,000 voters removed from the rolls. And so encouraging folks to vote in municipal elections will ensure that voters don't get left behind and show up to a polling location on election day having not been registered to vote. And so I'll drop a list maintenance resource in here for that. But voting in municipal elections and voting down ballot on all races are incredibly, incredibly important. And some of those races are decided, for example, like our Chief Justice race, by 300 some votes. And that has such an impact on locally and statewide. And so every vote truly does count. And in some local races, we've done some research at MNC on just the fact that 1 or 2 votes actually make a difference for key local races. And so ensuring that you vote the entirety of your ballot and participate in non-major election years is just a good practice.
Okay, great. I'll ask this one question, and we've touched on it throughout the day, but to both my panelists, organizations like this, days like this, going back, taking the information that we are being privy to, how would you say, in both your own words, how would you say that organization days like today benefit or would help out or not just our organization, our communities and everything, but help you out as legislators and going forward with the process and the work that you do?
Thank you so much. And I think what I will stress the most is there are 2 separate phases. And the same goes for local. We just talked about local elections, and every year I come from local government as well as state government. I'll use the budget process, for example. It happens every single year where folks go to their local city council meeting when the budget is already an agenda item and say, hey, wait a minute, can my nonprofit have $100,000? Or why aren't we spending more on, a community program? You're coming in at the end of the budget process, so you have to ask her what you want very early. So you all are coming in today, May 12th, we're knocking on crossover. But truth be told, if you really want your bills to move, you should enter this week knowing what's going to happen to that bill. One of my bills made it out of rules this morning, will be on the floor tonight, that I co-sponsor with another source, Senator Valerie Foushee. So there are 2 different steps. So there are bills that at this stage, this final push is what that bill needs, is stalled in committee, but can still make it towards crossover. But we will be coming up on our budget. So I would encourage folks to also begin to advocate for funding needs for the next 2 years. As the Legislative Black Caucus, as well as Divine Nine, we always advocate for all of our HBCUs that we have. If it were not for groups like this, we fought to keep Elizabeth City open, and now it is doing so much better than it was some years ago through the North Carolina Promise Program. So I think that is an example of advocacy. Remember during Delta days when, Senator Phil Berger and Speaker Moore was talking with Soror Goins about this yesterday, physically came to Delta days at the Raleigh Capitol, so we do know the power that we have, and legislators expect that. They're like, when are those women coming in their red suits? Like what day is that? So there's power in numbers. So again, look forward to the next 2 years. If there's legislation folks have in mind, again, with criminal justice, we can always do a better job with that. How should we invest? What should those policies look like? We talked about voting earlier, things like automatic voter registration, making election day a holiday. Those are things that be ready to fight for those in 2 years. You're never going to stop fighting for those issues. So you need to be forward thinking, meet with majority members of the House and the Senate early on in advance. We are here. We can help you all to organize those meetings. We also have priorities as the Legislative Black Caucus to give you that time frame. We provided our budget recommendations on February 8th. Like, that's how early you have to start. So February 8th of this last February is when we provided a multi-page document to the Speaker of the House, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, to say this is what we want to fight for as a Black community. And I think going forward, again, with that budget process, continue to reach out to your legislators early and often. And I think also when Divide 9 Legislative Day is in person again, typically folks physically meet with their members. I can't stress enough the importance of, if you represent the Asheville area, speaking to those majority members and those surrounding counties. Just because they're in Henderson County doesn't mean that they won't care. If you're saying, well, guess what, I work in Hendersonville but may live in Asheville, I'm coming to you to advocate for X, Y, and Z. Same for Elizabeth City. No matter where folks are, still reach out to your legislators. And so for me, the takeaway is you got to start early. You have to, because if it's a concept that's a little bit new, it takes some time to get folks to really come around to that idea. That's not something you can get done in 2 weeks. It may take you 2 years. But as Elisa said, we're in this for the long game. And so every single year, there should be legislative priorities that we are sharing at the chapter level. So we have our national orgs, take those national marching orders and say, for the state of North Carolina, this is what we need. For, Pitt County, this is what we need. For Mecklenburg County, this is what we need. Figure out what that is as a chapter and advocate to your General Assembly members, as well as your local elected officials. We should be advocating all the time. And another plug, voter registration. We should be doing voter registration all the time. And with voter ID on the horizon, making sure folks have IDs so that they are not denied their access to the ballot box.
Thank you, Senator Murdoch. And you have a couple of questions in the chat as well, if I'm not mistaken. Alyssa, if you can wrap it up and with that same question.
Yeah. So I think, Senator Murdoch hit the nail on the head, which is that this is a long range plan. So it's educating yourself now on these bills and also educating yourself on who your, local elected officials are and who's the advocates for the causes that mean the most to you. And, voting rights, criminal justice reform, healthcare, reproductive justice and access. I mean, our legislators are, on the opposition of, and facing immense opposition to some really progressive voting rights and other key areas. And so getting educated about them, picking up the phone and giving them a phone call, sending them an email. I think also in terms of redistricting, which was a question that was put in there on how can we stay active and make our voices heard, even though we don't have control of either chamber in our North Carolina legislature. And I think key to that is helping to, educate others about the importance of redistricting, but monitoring map making. This will be particularly important as the process moves forward to document issues that may need to be handled with litigation. Democracy North Carolina Black Alliance, League of Women Voters, a lot of us become plaintiffs in major federal and state litigation on redistricting. And so having community participation and process can make the difference and document the issues that we see when they're trying to disenfranchise Black voters, voters of color, voters at particular colleges like HBCUs. We've seen them try to split districts down the middle. And so I think one key way is to get involved with the North Carolina Black Alliance Code Red redistricting program, which will give you the tools that you need and will honestly probably pave the way for whatever we have to do to address gerrymandered maps that will likely take place. So just want to encourage folks to reach out. And, my favorite thing that my organizing friends do is, don't just take action yourself, but ask two people who are close to you to take action with you. And that's how we can amplify and multiply the voice and the power that we have. And as always, check your voter registration. If you just type in ncvoter.org or you just type in North Carolina voter registration, you can check it, make sure you're registered to vote. Encourage your friends and family to get registered if they're not.
Okay, great. Again, very empowering, very dynamic, very informative session is what we needed to bring back to our, not only to our organizations, but our communities, so that we can teach them and show them and share with them all the information and empowering things that we need to have so that we can go forward in voting and in legislative. Also, Alyssa, can you share in the chat before we depart of the grant opportunities that organizations have or can take advantage of that assist with Democracy NC, if you don't mind? And like I say, again, I am honored to be the host. In the background, I would say she's in the background, but she's always in the foreground with me, Kamaria E. Lawrence of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated is my assistant who helped me. Theta couldn't ask for two better teammates to put this together. Great, phenomenal, dynamic. Not just people, but I mean women, but not just people in general. They are such a loving and such a team oriented spirit. So I couldn't do it without them. And I thank you to my panelists and to the attendees that attended. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. And we will leave the panel open. Please do not forget to take part in our survey to show us how we did throughout this whole legislative day process and how we can make it better and improve it for you. Once again, I thank you, Senator Murdoch. I thank you, Alyssa Ellis. I hope you have a great day rested in doing all that you do for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of Devon 9 Day.
Thank you.